In this year of mercy, we focus on 3 ways we may be blind to God's merciful love in our lives. Blind to his mercy, blind to his love, and blind to his hope. Tonight, our second evening of the Parish Mission, we focus on blind to love. Please stand and pray in your hearts as I pray our opening prayer together. Father of mercy and kindness, your loving Son Jesus responded with his heart to individuals outside of the mainstream. He led the blind into the community, giving to both the blind and the community new eyes, new vision, and new hope. We praise and thank you for this marvelous lesson, and we ask your help as we try to follow in the footsteps of Jesus. Help us to discover our own blindness and to rejoice in the new vision. Help us to act in your name. And we make this prayer in the name of Jesus. Amen. Please be seated. I'm so pleased tonight to have the opportunity to introduce to you our speaker, Lisa Sennholz. Lisa's presentation is on human trafficking and the commercial and sexual exploitation we see around us. Lisa began her work in 2009, traveling to Cambodia with World Hope International. There, she was able to work with young girls and children and rescued them out of the sex slave industry. She's traveled to Atlanta, Las Vegas, Los Angeles for extensive training in the field and is very aware of human trafficking. Lisa is the former Wisconsin State Representative for Free International, based in Las Vegas. In 2013, she founded and became the director of a nonprofit ministry, Damascus Road. In January 2015, she joined a team formed of advocates from across the United States for the Super Bowl outreach in Phoenix, Arizona. There she worked in conjunction with the national organization In Our Backyard, providing training, reaching out to victims, and providing law enforcement with leads. In 2015 August, Lisa traveled to Latin America and partnered with the organization Breaking Change. There, she worked to help bring an end to the suffering of women, young girls, and children being victimized by sex trafficking. When Lisa is not busy with her organization, she and her husband, Dr. Troy, enjoy traveling and spending time with their 3 children, Jacob, Noah, and Josie. It is my pleasure to welcome Lisa Sennholz to St. Francis.
Okay, am I all ready to go? You can hear me okay? All right, great. So, a couple of things. First of all, I have no good place to put this, so I'm going to hang on to it. I'm a pacer. I can't stand in one spot. I usually have my Fitbit on, and it helps get my steps in, but my Fitbit died, and I couldn't charge it beforehand, but I'm still going to pace, because I know that I'm going to get the steps anyway. And then, the next thing is, I don't have a clicker, so someone is going to advance the slides for me. So you're going to see me do this, and that just means advance the slide. So I want to thank you for inviting me and to be able to come and speak. I actually live in Antigo, about 2.5 hours from here. So we didn't have snow today, and you guys did, which is amazing. So I kind of feel a little boastful about that we had a beautiful sunny day. So I kind of wanted to just give you a little general background on how I got involved in basically starting an organization and how I became aware of sex trafficking. But first, before I do that, I do want to mention that this is human trafficking. So the topic does include sex. So I like to give that little disclaimer in the beginning. I'm going to leave out many graphic stories, but there are things that I'm going to share with you that are going to make you feel very uncomfortable. And I can't apologize for that, because for the people that are victims, they can't be here and stand here like I can and tell you the story. I'm their mouthpiece. And so if I were to water down the information for you, that would be an injustice to these victims. So I'm actually hoping you will be very disturbed and moved, because that's when you actually do something. When something bothers you is when you actually take action. So I'm going to be truthful, and I'm going to be blunt. And I also wanted to mention that this presentation usually takes 2.5 to 3 hours. Tonight we only have 1 hour and 30 minutes, so I'm going to go really, really fast through certain sections. If we had more time, I could explain more. There are many slides I had to leave out because of the time constriction. So if you have questions afterwards, you can come up and see me. I'll be here by my table, and I'll be offering for you a chance to do something to help, and I'll explain what that is at the end, and then you can come up here and do that. So I'm going to fly through these slides and go really, really quickly. And normally I go into detail how I got started, but I'm going to try and give you the Reader's Digest version, which my husband makes fun of me because he said I don't own a Reader's Digest version when it comes to trying to lengthen or shorten a story, because I just talk all the time. But the gist of it is, in 2001, we traveled to the Philippines to adopt our daughter. And you can actually probably go ahead to the next slide. This is Josie. She was 15 months old. That was the day that we left the orphanage. That was the day that we arrived home, the photo on the right. At the time, my Jacob was 5, Noah was 3, and Josie was 15 months. When I went to the orphanage to adopt her, it was my second time in the Philippines, first time we were doing a medical missions trip. I had no idea about human trafficking until I asked a question of her orphanage director, which eventually changed the course of my life. I asked her a simple question. I said, so what will become of all the children that I see here in the orphanage that no one is coming for? And all of the children that are homeless on the streets that didn't even make it into the orphanage? What's going to happen to these kids? And she said, well, best case scenario is they're going to be some sort of domestic help. They're going to be cooks, they're going to be nannies, boys are going to be gardeners, drivers, but more than likely, they'll be trafficked and sold to the child sex brothel down the street. And I looked at her and went, first of all, trafficked? That's driving a car. I didn't know what that meant. And then child sex brothel? I said, so what do you mean, like when they're 12, 14, 16? And she pointed at Josie's orphanage. All the children there were under 3 and under. And she pointed to all the kids and she said, no, now. And I can't even tell you the bile and the disgust that I had when she explained that to me. So at that point, I knew someday I was going to do something to help these kids. At the time, I thought human trafficking only happened in the Philippines. That's all I knew. And so I promised myself that someday I was going to go back and I was going to help those kids that couldn't get out. Next slide. This is Josie now. This is last month at Winter Ball. And these are my boys, Jacob and Noah. Next slide. So here's a quote that I want to have you leave here thinking about. The world is a dangerous place, not because of those who do evil, but because of those who look on and do nothing. And so it's my hope and prayer that after this presentation, you won't leave here and do nothing. You will leave here and do something. You may not go out and start a nonprofit organization like I did, but what you do is just as important. What I really drive home when I speak to the kids in the high schools, well, first of all, I want them to educate themselves so they can prepare themselves if they're being groomed to be trafficked, or watch that and protect their friends. But secondly, I just want them to educate their friends. And so that's what I want you to do. I want you to learn enough information that you can memorize a few things, and when the topic comes up, or when you're sitting around having coffee, you can actually talk about this. Because what we see, the rescues of people here in the U.S., it's completely different than overseas. But in the U.S., It's knowledge. It's people who come to hear someone like me, and they go out about their daily lives, and they actually recognize signs that were there, but they never saw them because no one ever taught them what to look for. So we have many lay people who have assisted in rescues. So that is my number one thing I want you to take away tonight, is education, so you can impart that on others. Next one. So what exactly is human trafficking? We're going to go really fast through this because it's a boring definition. But basically, for law enforcement, they have to have force, fraud, or coercion present to be able to send that through as a human trafficking case. The only time they don't is when the person is under 18 years of age. It is always human trafficking. So when I talk to the students at the high school, I always say most of you here are probably under 18. If you are trading sex for money, sex for clothing, sex for food, sex for shelter, you are a human trafficking victim. The reason I have to explain that to them is even the people we work with who are out on the streets, who are servicing customers 10, 15, 20 a day, they will not self-identify as a human trafficking victim. So when we encounter people, we don't say to them, "Are you a human trafficking victim? Are you being sexually exploited?" They don't know. So we just like to say, under 18, always a human trafficking victim. Human trafficking includes all of these things, but for sake of time, we're only going to focus on sex trafficking. Labor trafficking does happen. We see that a lot in cities with tourism, Wisconsin Dells, Door County. We see that in agriculture. One of the big red flags is also nail salons. Sometimes those women, they're brought in, and during the day they're labor trafficked, and at night they're sex trafficked. So where does sex trafficking occur? It occurs in all of these places. But basically, street exploitation does not happen in Manitowoc. That is a certain street which we refer to, and the people in the life refer to, as a track. Miami, Chicago, Milwaukee, LA, all the big cities have a track or multiple tracks. You don't have that. But what you do have here are online exploitation. And we'll talk about that because now people don't need to go to a track to purchase someone. They just sit in front of their computer and click a few times. You also have strip clubs in the area, you have hotels and motels, you have gang and organized crime. So trafficking is happening in your area. I have a story I'm going to share in a little bit that happened in Sheboygan, which is how far from here? 20 minutes? Okay. Next. Traffickers can be anything. They can be U.S. citizens, they can be foreign nationals, they can be male, female, they're black, brown, purple, white, pink, polka dotted, they're everything. We've seen traffickers as high school students, we've also seen traffickers in their 80s. So what is a trafficker? So when I say pimp, I mean trafficker. When I say trafficker, I mean pimp. It's really just someone who comes along somebody who's already selling themselves, or they compel someone to sell themselves. Pimp generally takes, sorry. Maybe I'll just say next, because I'm always doing that. The pimp generally takes, usually always takes all their money from whatever the income is they brought in that day. Most people don't know that PIMP is actually an acronym, and it stands for something. It stands for provided income for managing prostitutes. And it's actually, after pimps have been arrested, 1 in 9 of them have told authorities that a school is one of their main recruiting grounds. Next one. So there's several types of pimps. We don't have time to focus on all of them. We're going to talk about the gentleman pimp, because that's what we see in the more small towns and rural areas are the gentleman pimps. I'm going to give you some examples later on, but just to give you an idea, a gentleman pimp is somebody, or a boyfriend Romeo. He's going to recruit people by pretending he loves them. Just a falsehood all the way around. So one of the pimps that was arrested in the Atlanta area, I was down there doing some work a few years ago, and the organization I was helping with at the time was so excited they got to pick the brain of this pimp when the police arrested him to find out how he was so successful at the business. Now this is the story he shared. Every pimp does not do this. This is what he did. It's a common thing, but this is not everyone's MO. So what he did was he would go to all of the malls in the general area of Atlanta and in the suburbs, and he would hang out at the food courts. And he would wait, and he would watch the girls. He said, I didn't look for the girls that were the prettiest. I did not look for the girls that had the best bodies. I looked for the girls that had the lowest sense of self-esteem, the lowest sense of self-worth. Those are the girls I targeted in on. So he would watch them, and if they got into a food line, say they got into the Taco Bell line, he'd get in line behind them just like a regular customer, and he'd strike up a conversation. And he'd say something cheesy, usually like, has anyone ever told you how beautiful your eyes are? And if her body language was like, okay, he didn't even waste his time on her. He just got out of line and waited for the next person. But if she engaged him and she said something like, really? Do you think so? Oh yeah, look how pretty your hair is. Whatever he needed to say. He would start the grooming process. If any of you are familiar with psychology, you're familiar with the fact that pedophiles will groom their victims. A lot of times they'll get to know single moms, they'll offer to babysit, they will offer to volunteer in whatever capacity to be around children to gain the trust. It's a grooming process. Traffickers do the exact same thing. They groom. And once their victim is at a point where they feel that the grooming process is pretty much complete, then they'll say something to get them to the next step. This is the boyfriend pimp I'm talking about. Gorilla pimps will beat. Gorilla pimps will starve. They will do intimidation techniques. I'm talking about the boyfriend pimp. So in this particular scenario, one of the things that he would say is, he'd say, baby, you know I love you so much, but I can't make my truck payment this month. And if I can't make my truck payment, how am I going to get to work? And if I can't get to work, we can't make our apartment payment. And he would put the sob story out there, and then she'd say, well, I'll do whatever, I'll do anything. Remember, this is a girl who has low sense of self-worth. She may have never had a boyfriend before. Typically, they target and look for younger girls who are more vulnerable, easier to fool. So remember, she has low sense of self-esteem. This man has been grooming her. Whatever it is she needs him to tell her. I love you. You're beautiful. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. He tells her all these things. So psychologically, she is so connected with him. She's willing to do anything to hang on to him. Next one. This is Ken Ivey. He's from Milwaukee. He wrote a book on how to be a good pimp. This is one of the quotes. Most prostitutes have low self-esteem for a reason. A pimp looks for that weakness. Then he uses those weaknesses to his advantage. Weakness is the best trait a person can find in someone they want to control. If you can't find a weakness, you have to create one. You have to tear someone's ego down to nothing before they will start looking to you for salvation. If a prostitute refuses, smack her and let her know you're disappointed in her. Once you're done humiliating her, she will eventually come around to the idea. You just got to keep at it, and eventually they will break. Ken Ivey currently lives in Milwaukee. Milwaukee is a hub for sex trafficking. Milwaukee has something that they host called the Pimp Roundtable, where all the pimps in the areas get together, and if you're in a business and you have business meetings, it's the same thing. They get together, they talk about ways to avoid the law enforcement, they talk about ways that work for them to groom victims, areas to look for victims. Oh, and I want to mention one other thing. Boys also are trafficked, but for sake of time, we're not going to talk about boys. We're only going to focus on girls. The boys we tend to see trafficked are runaways, homeless, gay, and transgender. So what is a John? So a John is basically somebody who is the customer of someone who's being sexually exploited. What is a brothel? So a brothel is really just a building that people go to exchange sex and money. I have an entire section in my long presentation where I teach you about brothels. It's very interesting how they operate. In Nevada, they have about 20 to 25 legal brothels at any given time. Nevada is the only state in the U.S. that allows for legal prostitution. It does not allow for it in the city of Las Vegas. Las Vegas is in Clark County. Clark County says, no, prostitution is not legal here. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. So on their books, it's not legal. But in all the counties surrounding, it is legal. We've done lots of work in those brothels. Many of them can be, some of them are small, little single-wide trailers, all the way up to very large resorts that have spa services, restaurants on site. When I was there, I formed a friendship with one of the girls who works at one of the top high-end brothels there. And her and I started a conversation. And then once we got to know each other really well, I said to her, can I ask you a quick question? How old were you when you first were sexually abused? And she looked at me and went, how would you possibly know I was sexually abused? I never told you that. Well, I know that because statistically, women who are willingly working in the sex industry have to have had something happen to them that line is crossed in their mind. Something in the way of molestation. Every single woman that I have ever worked with in the commercial sex industry, every one of them is a victim of sexual abuse, as a child or as preteen. So, when we talk about the slides later, I want you to keep in mind, I'm going to show you a bunch of rescues that happened in Wisconsin a few months ago. Many of them were adults. I don't want you to sit there and think, so what, they were adults, they can leave whenever they want to. Remember that they were abused at 5, 10, 12, whatever it was when their abuse happened. Abuse is normal to them. To people, I have never been sexually abused, I've never been physically abused. So any kind of abuse like that is abuse to me. But to these women, that's their norm. That is normal. That's what feels comfortable because they're used to abuse. So this woman said to me, well, I figured what my dad started taking from me at 5, I might as well now get paid for it. So keep in mind that when I talk about the rescues, it doesn't matter to me when we go in and help a 12-year-old get out or we help a 45-year-old get out. I don't look at the 45-year-old any differently because she's still that 5-year-old little girl that was raped mentally. So this is a photo that was taken at a brothel raid. This is an illegal brothel that happened here in the U.S. This is not a legal brothel. There are numbers written on the back of this chair. Those numbers are believed to be how many Johns that this girl had to service every day. Those numbers are 33, 34, 25, 26, 20, and 33. This is another picture of a brothel raid that happened somewhere here in the U.S. The FBI is really ramping up their raids of illegal brothels. And we're going to talk about an illegal brothel that was here in the U.S. Here in Wisconsin. So what is a stable? A stable is something, that is how pimps refer to their victims. And for sake of time, we're only going to talk about girls. So typically, there's an average of 5 girls or women working for a pimp. That's an average. So it's considered a stable of 5. There is always a girl in charge. She's referred to as the bottom girl. She's really the #1 girl in charge, but they use the term bottom. She is also a victim, but she is somebody who's usually been with the pimp the longest, and he gives her some kind of authority. She usually is in charge of the girls for him, so he doesn't have to deal with the drama. She is usually a main recruiter for him. When I talk in the high schools, I always talk to the high school kids about the fact that it's not necessarily the guy, the pimp, who's out recruiting. Many times he sends his bottom girl to do the recruiting because girls are much more apt to trust another female. And so they know that works. Keep in mind, you can keep it on this slide. Keep in mind who lives in a stable. Animals, horses, okay? I just want to point that out as we go. Next picture is seasoning. Seasoning is also something that happens. Overseas, we see seasoning a lot with gang raping, with intimidation, with burning. Usually here in the U.S., those things happen as well, but we see it more with the mental, psychological. Give you an example. One of the women who's now an advocate, she was trafficked when she was in high school by a gang of boys in her high school. And what they did is they had a party, and she went to it, and they spiked her drink. So she was drugged, and she passed out. While she was passed out, they gang raped her and took pictures and video of it. When she came to, they showed it to her, and they said, unless you do what we want you to do, we're going to release this. We're going to show your parents. Her father had a very influential position in the community, and she didn't want her dad to lose his job over this. And again, she's just a young girl, right? She doesn't see things the way we do as an adult. She can't think through those things. So she agreed to do what they were asking her to do. But once she realized she was going to have to service multiple Johns a day, she said, I'm not going to do this. I don't even care. Release the video. I don't care. I'm not doing this. And they said, yes, you are going to do this. And if you don't, we know where you live, and we're going to shoot your dog. And she said, you're never going to shoot my dog. And, well, sure enough, they did. They drove by and they shot her dog to prove to her. And then they said, and if you don't believe that, we know you have a younger sister, and if you don't do this, we're coming after her. So they will use any kind of intimidation that they need to. There are more enslaved people alive today than any other time in history. So right now, there's more slaves alive on the planet, that's labor and sex slaves, than there were during the 300 plus years of the transatlantic slave trade. That number is really hard to quantify. They think it's 30 million, but again, they don't self-identify. Next. Average price of a slave back in 1809 was $40,000. Slavery then is as horrible as it is today. There's no difference. The only difference is slaves in 1809 had value. The slave traders and the slave owners actually did value them because they paid quite a bit for them. In today's society, they don't. It's basically kind of the throwaway mentality of how we'd much rather have paper plates and, Solo cups than to actually do the dishes. It's sort of the same thing. Traffickers, there's so many now because of social media and because of their recruiting techniques, they can just get another person. Human trafficking generates about 32 billion. That number is really, really, really low. We believe it to be more like 100 billion, but until the U.S. Government actually says we can say that, we can't. And I'm going to say that off the record. It is closer to 100. Throughout history, slaves have been branded. That is a common thing that they did. Next slide. One of the things, keep in mind, these girls and men, they live in what's called a stable, right? Now they're branded. So immediately, their humanity is stripped from them. They're in a stable like an animal, and now they're branded like Farmer Joe's cattle that gets out. If his cow gets out, everyone knows it's Farmer Joe's because it's tattooed in the ear, right? It's the same thing with traffickers. Traffickers have barcodes, traffickers have their own insignias that they use. They'll come up with anything that is their symbol. The barcode is something we see overseas. That's pretty common. It's less common in the U.S., although I did do a training for TSA agents, like I stop with people at the airport. They basically, when I did the training, we got to the slide, one of the women shot up her hands and she said, I gotta interrupt you. I just saw that the other day. I was doing a pat down. She didn't want to go through the scanner. And when I patted her down, I saw that. I didn't know what to do. I just thought, that's a weird tattoo. It's a tattoo of a barcode. So chances are really high that she had a trafficked individual go through her line. Alex Cowboy Campbell, go to the next slide because I'm going to go through this really fast. He recruited girls from Belarus and Ukraine, and he recruited girls from the U.S. He recruited 18-year-old Nicole, who is actually from the Fox Valley, and she was on the streets of Chicago when he recruited her. He forced her to get this. His little deal was called Productions. That's what his tattoo was he forced. The next one is one of the stable sisters was forced to have this on her back, and I'm going to read it to you. It says, death of R.C. birth, dedication, determination, mind, body, and soul. Love, honor, and obey to the root of the beginning, Cowboy Productions. Many seeds of one root, following, understanding, and accepting the fruitful teaching. Till death I live for he, thou he lives in me. Anywhere I go, for he be and forever lives. What does that sound like? That sounds like scripture. That sounds like a Bible verse. Nicole told me that Alex Campbell said, I am Jesus Christ. I am your salvation. I own you. And so when Nicole and her stable sister actually went to the U.S. District hearing, and they stood there on trial, or testifying against Alex, the judge seeing this, the judge seeing Nicole and hearing their stories, he actually gave Alex life in prison. That happened in Chicago. Next one. After drug trafficking, human trafficking is now tied with the illegal arms trade, which is gun running, as the second largest. Let me explain to you why human trafficking is so lucrative. But first, what time is it? Oh, okay. All right, you can go back to that. All right, so the reason it's so lucrative is if I am a drug trafficker and my drug of choice, let's say it's meth, I have to either go make that meth and sell it to you, my customer, or I have to go purchase it from someone who makes it and then sell it to you, my customer. Once you consume it, it's consumable, right? It's gone. You need to come back to me and I need to do the same process. If I am a human trafficker, I have a stable. And we're just going to say that I have a stable of 5 because that's an average. So if I have a stable of 5, you can come to me and purchase girl number 1. Well, you're purchasing 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then we can flip-flop. You can take 2 and 4 and 3 and 1. Do you understand how the lucrativeness is? Because they're not consumable. They are. They eventually have a shelf life. But at the time, they're not consumable. And so a lot of times, one of the things we see at the Super Bowls is back in Miami, there was a free flyer. You know, I don't know what it's called here, but you guys get those free papers. Maybe they come out on Wednesday, like called the Shopper's Guide or something like that. They had something similar to that, but it was created just for the Super Bowl. And it was advertising all the restaurants and all the bars and nightclubs. But on the front of it, there was a girl, scantily clad. She was bending over a table with white substance, which everybody, of course, is going to assume is cocaine. And it says, Miami Super Blow. So when you opened it, you could basically find people who were willing to give you a package deal. So if you wanted oral sex and blow, which cocaine is called blow, you could get them both for a price. 2.2 million children are sold in the sex trade annually. Again, that number is very hard to pin down. When I was in Cambodia and we were out in rural villages, these people were completely uneducated. You could never ask them, are you a human trafficking survivor or a victim? And who's going to go out into the little rural villages anyway? This is just a number that they're trying to come up with, a rough estimate. Traffickers excel at these 3 things: manipulation, power, and control. A lot of times overseas, they will do document withholding. There's something that happened in Russia, where this is very common for them. They have false employment agencies. It truly looks like a legit business. The girls will go and they will sign up to work overseas. They think they're working in Germany, Spain, US, Canada, wherever, and that they're going to be front desk workers, they're going to be maids, whatever in the tourism industry. So they will turn over all their documentation to who really is the trafficker without them knowing. And then they're sent to whatever country and they're sold. This happened where 60 girls went to the false employment agency and signed up. They were sent from Russia to Turkey in a shipping container. By the time the shipping container reached Turkey, 30 of them were dead. Turkey overseas, for whatever reason, is called the breaking ground. That's the seasoning ground. In Turkey is where they generally do the beatings, the isolation, the starvation, and the gang raping. Because these are women who have been tricked. They in no way, shape, or form know that they're going to work in the sex industry. They think they're going to do a legitimate job. You, of course, think about yourself if you're a woman sitting out there. If someone tricked you and deceived you into that, you would fight back, right? Well, that's what these girls do. They fight back. And the more they fight back, the more they have to be beaten. That's the breaking ground in Turkey. So everything, all the tactics that are used to get the girls to comply. So once they were broken in Turkey, they were then put in a little dinghy, a little boat, and they were maneuvering through the waters, and their final destination was Greece. When they were outside of Greece, the Greek Coast Guard saw them and was kind of wondering what was going on, so they started to go out to see what the deal was. And as the traffickers saw them coming, they just started throwing the girls overboard. Because when this happened, the trafficking laws were not anywhere stiff as drug trafficking laws. So traffickers just thought, well, you can't prove it, and they figured they'd be drowned by the time the Coast Guard got to them. This is a general tactic overseas. Another thing that they do overseas is in Moldova, in the Ukraine, they have orphanages where the kids have to be released at age 16. The traffickers have gotten very smart. They wait outside of the orphanage. They pay somebody inside the orphanage, whether it's an orphanage director, it's a nanny, it's a cook, a gardener, whoever it is, they pay them to let them know how many children are being released every month. And so the traffickers will wait out of the orphanage and they'll sell alive to these kids. Now remember, these are orphans. They have no family. So once they are deceived and they're sent to whatever country, they're in another country that they don't speak the language of, no one's coming to get them. No one's coming to rescue them because no one knows they're missing.
Oh.
Next one. Okay, so there are cultural and environmental things that make people susceptible just by being female, by being young, and that previous sexual abuse. When I talk to the high school students, I always point that out to them and say, if you were sexually abused when you were small, if you're still being sexually abused, this has been taken from you. This was not yours to give, and it should have been. It was taken from you. So, in your mind, things are a little bit different than someone that wasn't abused, and it makes you much more susceptible to traffickers. They pick up on those things. Those are the people that they're looking for. People who have been broken, people who are vulnerable. They're the easiest to manipulate. Next one. So in some countries, they really are placed up on platforms and sold. So again, remember, they live in a stable, they're branded like cattle, and now they're put up on a platform and sold, basically like a 4-H fair pig. These are the top 11 countries right now. These change all the time, but these are the top 11 countries where the girls and the boys are being taken out of. The next slide is where they're being sent to, and you can see that the U.S. is on there. The U.S. is the second largest receiving country for trafficked individuals in the world. They're only number 2 because they count Europe as a whole. Next slide. Cambodia. I'm going to go through this really fast, but I want to explain to you. In Cambodian culture, for whatever reason, the men have been brought up to believe that when something is bad in their life, when they are physically ill, when their business is failing, when their marriage has trouble, if they have sex with a virgin, it will cure them. So when we were there, many of the virgins that they started pillaging from the countrysides were maybe 16, 17. Well, you can imagine when they start wiping out the 16 and 17-year-olds, now they're down to 15, 14, 13, 12. There's a lot of 5 and 6-year-olds being used because of that belief. While we were there, there was a girl, a 12-year-old virgin, who that's pretty old, and she had been sold to a brothel. And a man had purchased her, bought her for a week. Virgin sales they range usually between 800 and 4,000. It depends. He purchased her for a week. When he brought her back to the brothel, The brothel owner took one look at her and went, well, we can't do anything with this, and basically tossed her out into the street. She was hemorrhaging to death. Remember, she's a 12-year-old virgin. She had been so brutalized, and I'm not going to get graphic, but everyone here knows what female genitalia looks like. She had nothing recognizable. From front to back, it was just open. So the abuse that she had suffered, she was hemorrhaging in the street. She had infection that had gone systemic. And so the organization I was with actually flew her to Bangkok, Thailand, and she had vaginal reconstructive surgery. But it was months before they could do that because her infection, she was basically almost dead. It was a miracle of God she lived. These are two little girls that were actually being forced to recruit outside of a brothel. And that is, up on the top there, that used to be the #1 child sex trafficking brothel in the world. There were underground sex tourism industry. Do you remember back in the day when you could buy a fun jet package, when it would be like the airfare and the hotel and transportation? They have underground sex trafficking tourism where you can buy a package price. You pay one price and they will send you to that brothel and you can choose whatever children you want at that brothel. When I was there, it was 2009. In 2003, it had been raided by a U.S. team that came in and freed the children. A pastor and his wife heard about it. They were from California, and they decided to sell everything they owned, and they moved to Cambodia, and they went to that former brothel that is now sitting empty after the U.S. team raided the brothel, and they came in and turned it into a community center. So that's what it is today, is they are there to teach the men that having sex with a virgin is not going to cure you of the flu. It's not going to make your business more successful. And they also are there to teach the kids basically what's happening to them isn't right. Next one. This was one of the brothel rooms. When they remodeled the brothel, in the far back they kept 2 rooms so that visiting teams that came in to do work there could see what it looked like. Each room was about a 5x7 cubicle, and that's what the child lived in and worked in. Next one. I was in Nicaragua in September. You can go to the next slide. We worked with brothels and bars and basically street exploitation. You can go back just quickly. You can't see on here, but this is a brothel and a bar combined. It takes up about half a city block. It goes that direction. And you can't see, but there's women standing all along the outside. They would stand outside and recruit, and then they would take their johns on the inside. They had basically what was equivalent to almost like a vacuum stall, and that is where they would service the johns. Next slide. What we did is, you can see the American men here on the bottom. I went with a team of 15 U.S. men because the original plan was to do a brothel raid. Just like the raid I told you about in Cambodia, we're going to do a raid in Nicaragua and free the children that were being held there. At the last minute, the brothel raid fell through, but we were all still in country, so we did other things instead. One of the things that we did, these guys are, most of them, this guy's a former SEAL here with a swim trunks and Gilligan hat on. They pretty much all were military, law enforcement, had some sort of background like that. Women are not allowed to do raids. The men do the raids, and then the women, we help receive the children after. And don't get all riled that women aren't allowed. It's not a sexist thing. It's because of the fact that the men have to pretend to be sex buyers. A woman is not going to be a sex buyer, generally. So what we did, you go back just for a second, what we did is we went out onto the streets, into the brothels, and into the bars, and onto the street exploitation, and we said, we're going to throw a party. Okay, they've done this for years in Nicaragua, but this was not our original reason we were there. But what we did was, we handed out invitations, and we said, on Sunday, be at this particular spot, vans will come and pick you up, and we will bring you to a party. Now, we were telling this to the women and the children that were working the streets. So these are all people being sexually exploited. They had no idea that when they got to the party, we were going to offer them a way to get out of that life. In Nicaragua, this organization has a sustainable business plan where they help these women get into having a business of their own so they can support their families and get off the street. So we gave them the destination or the location they were supposed to be at. We had no idea how many people were going to show up. No idea. And so my job was to wait for the first van to pull up and to greet the girls and the children getting off the van. You can't see here, but right here is a driveway. And so I'm standing there waiting, and I see the first van pull up, and I immediately start crying because I know what is awaiting these women and children. They have a chance of freedom. They don't know that. But I'm so excited for how many people are in the van. It's completely packed. And the van driver rolls down the window and says to me, there's so many people at the location, I don't even know how many trips I'm going to make, which was so exciting. We're going to just have tons and tons of people. So they start piling out of the van, and a woman comes over to me, and she just speaks as fast as she can. And my Spanish is very limited. And I'm trying to tell her, I only speak a little Spanish. I don't understand. And she's just, saying this to me. And I end up finding out that the reason so many women decided to take us up on our offer to come to the pool party is because of all of the men that we had with us. Because when we were out on the streets, they were saying, are these guys going to be at the party? Yeah, all right, we'll be there. So they showed up because of the U.S. men, and this woman says to me, I wish I have to go get an interpreter because I have no idea what she's saying. She keeps repeating the same thing. And finally, their interpreter comes over, and he asks her, what is it that you're trying to say? And he bends over laughing. Now, he's laughing, and she's laughing. I don't have a clue what's so funny. And he said, she wants to know which one of these men are your husbands so she doesn't hit on them. And I said, well, actually, none of them. She started clapping her hands and jumping up and down. She was so excited. Because a lot of these girls know that the U.S. teams that come in, when they help get the women off the streets, and the women go through the rehabilitation program that they offer, the women who are on the other side now, who've gone through the program, they then go out and minister to the girls that are on the streets. The teams coming down, a lot of times meet the women who are on the other side now, and start a relationship, and one of the girls had actually just gotten married from a U.S. guy that came down on a missions team. So they were so excited to see us all there. Next slide. This girl was 12 when she was forced to be on the street. When we helped her get off, she was actually 17. We're helping her get back into a program. And when I say we, I mean the organization I was there with. I don't personally have an organization in Nicaragua. I was partnering with that one. Next slide. This is Eric Justin's Holt. Eric is a very interesting character. He was a school teacher. Eric was wanted by the FBI. He was on their top 10 list. He was wanted for lots of different things, with child exploitation and child porn. The states that you see listed are the states they know he was in. And in 2009, Eric completely fell off the radar of the FBI. They lost him. And so when Osama bin Laden was captured, and Osama bin Laden was no longer on the FBI's most wanted list, he was #1, they replaced him with Eric. What happened was, one of the times that the team I was with was out on the street, and they were talking to women saying, hey, we have a party, pool party, kind of doing the same thing to give them an opportunity to get out. One of the women that said, yeah, I'm going to take that opportunity. She came to the pool party, and she brought her daughter, who was 7 years old. They started questioning the daughter because they wanted to know if the daughter was also being sold. And the daughter said, well, there's this gringo. And now, if you know anything about Hispanic culture, they refer to people who are not Hispanic as gringos. And she said, there's this gringo that's been touching me and my friends, and she started describing him. So, the director of the organization called the FBI, called ICE, and said, I think we have somebody here. Our FBI and ICE flew down to Nicaragua, partnered up with the Nicaraguan FBI, and sure enough, it turned out to be Eric Justin Toth. When he ran away, next slide, when he ran away in 2009, that's where he ran to, was Nicaragua. These are some of the kids, actually, of the women that worked on the street, and this little guy I wanted to take home in the worst way. Next slide. This same organization, just this December, did a sting where they went in, the kind of sting we were supposed to do in Nicaragua, they did in Peru. They ended up finding 64-year-old Joshua David Brown, who was a U.S. citizen from New Hampshire. He was selling children. He had an underground travel agency, like I told you about, for pedophiles. They were able to rescue 11 minors and 25 adults. The two youngest were 4 and 7. They were being sold for $4,000 and $7,000 each. He was known, the guy that they arrested in Peru, as the Beast. He's also accused of killing 2 of the children. They're now searching to try and find their bodies. It's an ongoing investigation. So that organization, Breaking Chains, has been in existence for 10 years. They're now at 1,800 victims they've rescued. Doing amazing work. So this I kind of wanted to just give you a little idea of why we do what we do. When I was in Cambodia, one night I had worked with a 7-year-old girl who had been just rescued from a brothel. She had PTSD. It was horrible. It was the worst thing I'd ever seen in my life because this was my first entrance into trafficking. I'd never witnessed anything like this before. And I went to bed that night and I was so mad at God. And I said, God, why? Why would you allow this to happen to these children? They're innocent victims. I'm so mad at him. And the good thing is, God's a big God, and it's okay. He understands when we get mad, because there's something called righteous anger. That's what I had, was righteous anger. And so as I laid there, and I cried, and I prayed, and I cried, God told me, you know what? What do you think about every morning when you get up? Well, myself, my kids, how the day's going to go. Right, I am really good about thinking about myself. I'm really good at loving me. But am I good at loving my neighbor? And my neighbor is not just my neighbor physically next door. My neighbor is whoever I come across. These girls in Cambodia were my neighbor. So, God told me, God gave me this verse. A Jewish man was traveling on a trip from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he was attacked by bandits. They stripped him of his clothes and money, beat him up, and left him half dead beside the road. By chance, a Jewish priest came along, but when he saw the man lying there, he crossed to the other side of the road and passed him by. A temple assistant walked over and looked at him lying there, but he also passed by on the other side. Then a despised Samaritan came along, and when he saw the man, he felt deep pity. Next slide. Kneeling beside him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds with medicine and bandaged them. And then he put the man on his own donkey and took him to the inn, where he took care of him. The next day, he handed the innkeeper 2 pieces of silver and told him to take care of the man. If his bill runs higher than that, he said, I'll pay the difference the next time I'm here. You can go to the next slide. So basically, in this parable, Jesus is talking about a man who's been hurt. He's left helpless on the side of the road, right? No one stops to help him except for this person who no one would think would stop to help. When he stops to help, he disrupts everything that were his priorities. The Bible doesn't tell us what the Good Samaritan was on his way to do. We don't know if he had a business meeting, dinner plans. He was on his way to something. He allowed himself to be inconvenienced. He got down and he got personally involved with this man. He paid for him. He helped him. He had no idea if the bandits were still lurking nearby. His own personal safety was possibly at risk, but he didn't care. He got down and he helped these people. And basically, the Bible says Jesus walked the earth. He spent his time with prostitutes, tax collectors, and sinners. And if the rest of us, me included, if we're not willing to do that, then our lives are pretty much irrelevant. Because this is what we're supposed to do. We are supposed to help those who are less fortunate. That's what the Bible says. Next slide. At least 100,000 to 300,000 youth are at risk right now for sexual exploitation. They know in the U.S. about 100,000 youth are being sold. Now we're only going to be talking about the U.S. right now. We're going to not talk about international. Next slide. Average age of entry into prostitution is 12 to 14 years of age. Time. All right, so within 48 hours of leaving home, a teen runaway has 1 in 3 chance of being approached. Usually by the time they're on the street, 72 hours, 2 out of 3 of them have already been approached by a trafficker. You'll see in the slide that I'm showing later, keep this in mind, because that comes into play. What's the reality for these victims? Well, they're constantly being raped, they're changing their appearance, they're having threats made against them. Next slide. They have to basically call a man who's not their father or daddy, because almost all pimps require their victims to call them daddy, whether they're 13 or 53. They call them daddy. They're getting STDs, they're being arrested. Now imagine, all of these things are happening to them when they're 13 years old. The average of the person that's being trafficked in the U.S. What were you doing at 13 years old? Could you have withstood any of those things? Pimps, oh no, I lost my mic. Jeez, Louise. Okay. Basically, this is a pimp's weekly income chart. Atlanta right now, pimps are making about $32,000 a week. I forgot to tell you the Atlanta story. I was telling you about the pimp who went to the food court. Do you know how much he was making? Somebody yell out. He was very, very wealthy. How much was he making? He was making $1.5 million per month tax-free cash money. This is why the organization wanted to talk to him and pick his brain and find out how he was so successful. These are top cities right now in the U.S. These change, but what's on there that stands out to you? Minneapolis, right? Because nobody is surprised at New York, Miami, LA, blah, blah, blah. But Minneapolis, right? Next slide. What's the city on there that stands out to you? Right, next slide. Operation Cross Country happened just this past October, just a few months ago. The FBI does this every year, Operation Cross Country. When they did this, they coordinated with 500 law enforcement all throughout the U.S. They were in 135 different U.S. cities. They went to hotels, casinos, truck stops, and other areas. When they did that, they recovered 149 children who were being sold for sex. The youngest was 12. They were able to arrest 153 pimps. Before we get to the next slide, I just want to tell you, this next slide, and the slide after that, is going to be a breakdown of each county in Wisconsin that had rescues. Keep in mind, when you see these rescues, there's going to be a lot of adults on there. But remember, they're victims as well. Next slide. So, in Wisconsin, they were able to rescue 9 kids and 50 adults. Appleton had 1 adult, 1 trafficker. Brown County, 10 adults and 3 traffickers. Fond du Lac, 1 adult, 1 juvie, and 1 trafficker. La Crosse, 2 adults and 1 trafficker. Milwaukee, 11 adults and 5 juvies, 1 trafficker. Monroe, 1 juvie. Oak Creek, 5 adults. Oshkosh, 3 adults, 1 trafficker. Racine, 20 adults and 1 trafficker. And West Dallas, 3 adults and 2 juvies and 2 traffickers. Next one. All 72 counties in Wisconsin now have documented cases of human trafficking. That means your county. Back in 2013, the FBI did this exact same thing. When they did that back then, they were able to rescue victims who ranged in age from 14 to 17. They only had 76 cities participating. Remember, a couple months ago it was 135. When they did that, out of the 76 cities, Milwaukee, Madison, Wisconsin Dells, and Fox Valley were tied for the second highest in rescues in the nation. You can go to the next one. We just said that. Okay. Operation Vanguard actually happened in March of 2014. A bunch of police departments, Ashwaubenon, Green Bay, Outagamie, Oshkosh, Fond du Lac, Wausau, Shawano, could go on. All of these departments got together and did a sting. They went online and they pretended to be people looking to purchase children for sex. When they did that, they had 1,000 people contact them to purchase a child. Out of those 1,000, they were actually, next slide, only able to charge 19 of them. 6 from Brown County, 5 Wausau, 4 Oshkosh, 3 Shawano, and 1 Outagamie. One of the Shawano guys that was arrested was in training to be a school bus driver. And he said he thought he was talking to 3 different 15-year-olds to purchase for sex, but they turned out to be undercover agents. When they were arrested, these are a few things the men said. One of them said, "I know that sex with a minor is wrong." Another said, "I thought they'd have to tell you if they're a cop." And the other says, "My sexual curiosity for young boys got the best of me today." Next one. This happened in Fitchburg. Are you familiar with Fitchburg? It's by Madison. 15-year-old runaway. She had a 10-month-old son. She met a man, he took her to Atlanta, and he put her on the sex for sale website that we're going to talk about shortly. She was actually located because someone at a hotel actually recognized some red flags and called something in. Next one. Sheboygan. Parents called police after they were notified by the high school that their daughters were not in class, even though the parents were dropping them off and picking them up. The Sheboygan Police Department decided to send a surveillance van to the school, and they observed vans arriving at the lunch hour and girls piling out and getting into the vans. They followed the vans, and when they got to where they were going, they realized that it was an illegal brothel in Sheboygan. Sex buyers were already lined up, waiting at the house. The girls were brought in, and they were then asked, "Do you want them drugged or not drugged?" Next slide. Mercer. Mercer's a tiny little community. Actually, it's like 1,800 people. Back in 2013, authorities responded to a call from a Mercer hotel where a 14-year-old girl was fleeing from 3 women who were forcing her into prostitution. The girl had been brought to the Northwoods to meet an older man. That older man turned out to be a 67-year-old man who bought her on the sex for sale website. He paid $1,000 for her, and then he said, "I'll pay another $300 if you'll bring her up to Mercer." Next one. What happened was she was actually a 14-year-old girl running down the street barefooted at 6:30 in the morning. She had been advertised on that sex for sale website. One ad had her at 19, one had her at 21, but the reality was she was 14 years old. She was a runaway. Okay, the slide we just talked about. She had been approached, offered alcohol, drugs, clothes, and a place to stay. Who approached her? The bottom girl. So the bottom girl was one of those 3 women that had recruited her. When she got up to Mercer, she had no idea that that's what they had brought her there to do. Hence, running down the street at 6:30 in the morning barefoot. So I want to point out, when I started doing this, I would go to the police departments and I would say, "Do you understand trafficking?" And they'd say, "Oh, that doesn't happen here." Okay, well, I didn't have these cases to point to because this was 2009, 2010. But when Mercer happened, I went back to some of those police departments and said, "Remember you told me that you're too small to have trafficking happen? Do you think, what about Mercer? Because Mercer is only 2,000 people." So police departments now are doing a very good job. They're hopping on board, they're getting educated, they're understanding. But just a few years ago, it was a completely different story. Next slide. Super Bowl, we do this every year. Well, I don't go every year, I go when I can. I didn't go this year because my daughter had winter ball and my son had parent night for hockey, which I have to mention. My son's hockey team won the regional division. We're going to Madison for Thursday, playing for the state championship title. So I'm so excited. Hi, baby. So Super Bowl. So when I was in Phoenix last year, we trained hotels, limo companies, gas stations on red flags of what to look for, because the Super Bowl, as in any large venue, is going to attract traffickers. It doesn't matter if it's sports related, if it's a concert. We did, I don't know if you're familiar with the EAA in Oshkosh, the Experimental Aircraft Association. We did an outreach 2014. Prior to that, we thought the police department in Oshkosh was going to be really difficult to work with. So we started charting all of the sex for sale ads. And we wanted to prove to them that before there's a big event, there's this many ads. And during a big event, there's this many ads. So we show up with all of our stuff and they were like, oh man, we already know that. Like, we'll help you, we'll give you whatever you need. So the Oshkosh Police Department is amazing, they're wonderful. I give them props every single time I can talk about them because they are setting the standards other police departments need to follow what they're doing. But one of the things that we did in Oshkosh, and we did it in Sheboygan during the PGA tour just in August, was we trained the hotels and we trained the gas stations on what to look for. And when we did the limo companies, we had a limo driver come to us and say, I'm willing to lead the training for limo drivers. So we did that. First limo driver he went and talked to, we had a little booklet made up with 43 missing children that we believed were probably being sexually exploited. Couldn't prove it, but we believed it to be so. The night before, we printed off from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children 4 pages of children that went missing because we couldn't get them in the book in time. So I gave him the books and I gave him a flyer, but we ran out of flyers. I only had Courtney, who was a 14-year-old girl who had just went missing. I had 43 people in the book, but I ran out of all my flyers. The copier broke down where we were at. It was just a fiasco. And he said, I'll take the one flyer you have, and I'll go to the limo companies. The guy he talked to first showed him the book. He flipped through it. No, I don't know any of these kids. Then he showed him the flyer of Courtney, and the guy said, I know that girl. She was in my limo last night. I can tell you where I picked her up. I can tell you the guy that she was with, what he looked like, and I can tell you where I dropped her off. So we then called the Phoenix PD. We got them involved, and they went and did a bunch of interviews and whatever it is they do. And within 24 hours, Courtney was subsequently rescued. And so those were the kinds of things that we did while we were there. This year was the first time the FBI actually asked to work with us. And we were like, oh, I guess so. I mean, yeah, whatever. Of course. So we worked with the, and so one of the things they said, would you guys during the day, would you monitor the Sex for Sale website and flag every ad where it looks like the victim is under 18 years of age? We are so inundated, we cannot focus on anybody that looks over 18. This is all we can do. So next slide, during the day, we would go on, and these are a couple ads of girls. The next one. Do these girls look to be over 18 being sold? No. Okay, so this is one of the Homeland Security officers. He actually said that they're starting to see predators using Xbox and PlayStation Live. So if your children and your grandkids are gamers, you need to be cognizant of what they're playing. When my boys were littler and they played things, I was very mother hen over what kinds of things they could play. But when they would try and say to me like their backyard baseball or whatever they played, they'd try and explain, I'd be like, I'd only kind of pretend I was listening. I didn't know what they were talking about. But now, they play online with people live. So the predators are coming on live and actually communicating with the kids. Next one. I wish I could tell you this, we don't have time, but go to the next one. So let's take a look at what traffickers and pimps look like. Most people think this is what they look like. Sometimes they do, but more often than not, they look like this, and like that, and like this. Like we talked about in the beginning, they're male, female, old, young, polka dotted, it doesn't matter. Next slide. This is the Sex for Sale website I was telling you about. These, oh no, go back, sorry. We'll stay on this one for a bit. These girls, I have to point out, they have individual ads. I made these four, I mushed them together, these four. The reason I did that is because when I was doing research, I realized each individual ad had one thing in common. Can you guess what that one thing is? The phone number. Each girl who's being sold separately has the same phone number. That tells me that's a stable. That's a stable of 4. Next one. Same thing. Each one of these girls had an individual ad. That tells me this is a stable of 6. Next one. This is a real ad. This is what it says. 2 girls being sold in the Madison area. Next one. This is another ad. This girl's being sold Appleton, Oshkosh, Fond du Lac, Green Bay, La Crosse, Sheboygan, and Wausau. This one is being sold Stevens Point, Anago, where I live, Merrill, Marshville, Wausau, Clover, and surrounding areas. This one, Appleton, Oshkosh, Fond du Lac, says she's 21. She looked to be 21. This one says 21 as well. This one's being sold in Wausau. That's her again. This one's being sold in Eau Claire, says she's 24. Who thinks that girl? Can you go back to that one? Who thinks she's even 15? She's probably 15 or 16. Next one. This one is Wausau. I think that's it. I wanted you to have a smattering and see where they're being sold. I'm going to talk about this slide in a minute, but that sex for sale website, you can log on to it right now, plug in your city that you want. Sheboygan is one of them. There's a certain amount of cities that are listed for Wisconsin. Milwaukee, Madison, Eau Claire, Oshkosh, Fond du Lac, Appleton is all kind of one. Green Bay, Wausau, Sheboygan. So you type in your city, and then it tells you who's being sold, and you can basically pick who you want. It's like going to a mall. It's right online. It's like online shopping. This is a girl who was arrested for prostitution as a minor. When she was arrested, no one intervened and said, wait, you're a minor. You're an automatic human trafficking victim. They just kept booking her as a criminal. Next one, same thing. This girl at her first booking for prostitution looks to be probably 12 to 14 years of age. Do you see the progression through the bookings of the beatings and the drug use? Next one, same thing here. No one intervened for these girls. Things are getting better now. People are intervening. There are advocates. The police departments are aware now. And the next slide, I think, is the worst. I guess if you could say one's worse than the other. Time? Oh my word. Okay. We will go to next slide. I have a whole section on porn that we're not going to be able to talk about. Porn now, the average age of children consuming pornography in the U.S. now is age 11 because of social media. When I did a presentation at a high school, a Christian high school, a number of years ago, a boy came up to me and he said, I need to talk to you. The stuff you talked about, the statistics you gave, I am one of those kids. I was 11 when I became addicted to porn. By 16, I was in a rehab facility. I'm now 18, and I have to have mentors. I have to, basically, he kind of has to be checked up on all the time. And he talked to me about how when I need to go into high schools and I need to talk about the connection between porn and trafficking, which I already knew there was a connection because the Johns that we work with all tell us that pornography is part of it for them. One of the Johns that I work with in particular, he is now 46 or 7. His story, he became addicted to pornography when he was young. He slept with women all the time, and eventually his porn addiction led him to want to do different things that a typical woman he was dating did not want to do. So he started purchasing women. And he told me that the problem is being a porn addict. Now, I don't know because I'm not a porn addict. I'm telling you what he says. He said, the problem is I've drank, I've tried coke, I've smoked pot. He said, the thing is, when I'm not doing those things, it's out of my system. But with porn, I can call it up at a moment's notice. It's always in my brain. I can't detoxify myself from it. And so now, he's at a point, he's 47 years old, he's in a committed relationship, but he can no longer have sexual relationship with his girlfriend because he has trained his brain to only be sexually stimulated from a computer. And so his story is really not that uncommon. We'll go through these slides. I just wanted to say that porn, when we talk to the kids in high school, I explain to them that porn is like a drug to your brain. Your brain does not know the difference if it's taking in heroin, if it's taking in food, nicotine, alcohol, or porn. It doesn't know the difference. The pathways in the brain that get stimulated that send out dopamine, they don't know. They're just sending out the dopamine. So after a while, those pathways become hijacked. And as a heroin addict, that first hit that they take, after that they need more, right? That first hit that got them high is not going to work anymore. They're going to need the next step. It's the same thing with porn addicts. We'll go to the next. There's a doctor from Princeton who said, it's as though we have devised a form of heroin usable in the privacy of one's own home and injected it directly to their brain through the eyes. He's talking about porn. We're going to just skip this, go through the next because we don't have, teens have a much higher risk. I do want to put that out there. The teen's brain reward pathway is 2 to 4 times more stronger than ours. So when a 13-year-old eats a piece of chocolate cake, it tastes a lot better to them than when a 63-year-old eats a piece of chocolate cake. It might taste really good at 63, but it tasted way better at 13. It's the same thing. And our teens now, if you remember back in the day, pornography was something you had to find hidden under a bed. Your uncle, your grandpa, your dad had a dirty magazine, a Playgirl, Boy, whatever it's called, Playboy, I guess. And you had, but now the kids, they just call it up on their phone and anytime they want, on their laptop. So what they're being taught of as sex is completely different than what we grew up with. Keep going. Okay, before I talk about her, I've got to tell a quick story about my Noah, the one that's going to state for hockey. A couple years ago, I went in and spoke at his high school. I go there now on a regular basis every semester. But it was his health class, and I was talking, and he was mortified, but yet he was like, okay, well, this is what my mom does. But then his class got over, and the next class came in. I did like 5 or 6 in a row that day. And for whatever reason, I've never said this prior, and I never said it after. But for whatever reason, I was giving them an example about porn, how I work with former porn actresses, and I work with women who work in the brothels, and blah, blah, blah. And they tell me that everything they're doing is fake, and they hate it, and wish they didn't have to do it. And I'm explaining the whole thing. And I said, I can stand here and talk to you about porn because I work directly with people who work in the porn industry. I can stand here and talk to you about sex because I have sex. As soon as I said it, I was like, oh, that was so awful to say. So I kind of skipped over and went on, and I thought maybe no one would say anything. Class got out, the bell rang. Within a minute, my phone is going off, and it's Noah texting me. Why did you just say that? He said, I'm going through the hallway and I hear, hey, Sennholz, you know your mom watches porn and has sex? So I don't say that anymore. But, so this is Chasey Lane. Chasey Lane was found in Miami. She was working at a strip club. She was 18 years old. Porn producer came by, recruited her and said, you'd make much more money in porn. So she flew out to Southern California. Am I at 10 minutes? She flew out to Southern California and started her career in porn. She filmed over 150 adult movies and did other things, modeling for magazines and that sort of thing. I think Chasey Lane is absolutely gorgeous. Every year she was in porn, she won an award. Most beautiful woman in porn, whatever, whatever. Next slide. This is Chasey Lane now. This is what a life in porn will do to these women. Next slide. This is something that we do every January, National Human Trafficking Awareness Day. President Obama, a number of years ago, declared that as a national day. Why he made it January 11th instead of July 11th, I'll never know. Because we actually stand on the corners with signs and with traffic. The last 2 years, the Oshkosh Police Department has come alongside us and they brought their, I don't know what it's called, their big van thing that they have. It's like a paddy wagon thing. And they have a big screen on the outside and they play the video for us and they were there to help answer questions. And so now we do this in Oshkosh, Milwaukee, and Green Bay are now part of it. So if you're ever interested in starting, we only do it for a few hours on that day on one of the city's busiest corners, just to get information out to people. Presentations and trainings, we do all sorts of them. These are just a few ideas. I am not into any of the schools in this area. If you are a teacher, if you have connections to be able to get us into schools, that would be great, because the number one thing is to educate the kids so they protect themselves to not be trafficked. This is the other things that we do, the hotel, motel, gas station trainings, which we did for the PGA Tour in the Sheboygan area. I don't think we came this far though. I think we did Sheboygan Falls, whatever's right around there. Next one. So these are some things to keep in mind. The pimps will recruit at malls, at schools, at parks, wherever kids are is where they will go. These are some social sites, some social media sites that we tell the kids to avoid because they actually are on these. They're on Kik and Yik Yak and Snapchat. Next one. They're also on Facebook. One of the FBI stings, when they arrested this guy, he had just sent out 800 messages on his Facebook account, and this is exactly what it said. Hey, thanks for adding me. You're very pretty. Would you be interested in a job making money? That was how he recruited. Chat roulette, Tinder. Keep going. Whisper, Instagram tag, all of these, they're on. These are internet acronyms. If you want this, see me afterwards and I will email it to you. Parents don't have a clue when their kids are saying these. You wouldn't know what LH6 means. You would have no idea, but now you would. Next one. So if you want that, see me. Vulnerabilities, we talked about all of these things. I wish I could have told you Andrea's story because it plays into this. But low self-esteem, running away, foster homes, substance abuse, any kind of sexual abuse in their past. Next one. Traffickers' tactics. We talked about that. A lot of times they will get their victims dependent on drugs and alcohol, but that's dependent on traffickers. Some like them dependent, others don't want them dependent. These are warning signs. If you want to see these things in more detail, because we're running out of time, I usually spend lots more time on these, this stuff is on my website. So you can look for these things. Material possessions, if we go back to that for a second, one of the things I tell the high schoolers is, if you've got a friend who you know they A, don't have a job, and B, their parents cannot afford to buy them an iPhone, an expensive name brand, pants, or whatever, and they start showing up with all these things, pay attention to that. Ask your friend, where did you get that from? How did you get the money? Did you babysit? What did you do to get that money? Usually, they will come to school with a lot of expensive material possessions. They'll brag about this new job that they have. They will start speaking in a different language. They will start using terms. The story I wanted to tell you, Andrea's story, her daughter started saying all these things and she thought it was just the different lingo now that was being spoken. Drastic changes, their friends, usually their boyfriend will be an older boyfriend that you don't really see much of. Their clothes change, their school grades usually start declining, their attitude in general. Next one. So this is a number that you can put in your phone. If you see something, you're out somewhere, and you want to report something, that 888 number and the texting number is the way to do it. Unless it's an immediate emergency that you need to call 911, then you call 911. But most people will call this and go, I saw this, and I'm not quite sure if it was worth reporting, but I just want to report it. And a lot of times, it's the tiny little piece to the puzzle that law enforcement has been looking for. Because this 888 number, they are on the East Coast, and they compile all of this tips, and then they forward them to the police departments. When we were at the Super Bowl, and we were sending all this information to the FBI, they were so inundated with what we were sending them, they said, stop. We can't receive anymore. Start sending it to the 888 number. They will disseminate it and send us what they think we need to have. So the 888 number is definitely a number to call. Next one. So Scarlet Cord, I started this a number of years ago. It's a brothel prayer ministry. When we were in the brothels, I realized that these girls need to be prayed for. And so I came up with the idea. I have a card. If you come up here and you sign up, you will get a card of someone who's being sexually exploited, most often in the brothels, but some of these cards mixed in might be people working on the streets of Milwaukee or whoever you come in contact with. You get their name, you get their age if we know it, the brothel they work at, or the city they're working in if it's a street, and then you just pray for them. You just say, I will pray for Allure Mystique, whoever your girl is that you get. And these are all stage names. These are not their real names. But I will pray for Allure Mystique for 40 days. Commit to at least 40 days. Most people that take one of these cards, they put them on their fridge or they put them in their Bible or something like that, and they keep praying. Years later, I get messages from people. I'm still praying for my girl. Do you know what happened to her? The thing is, we usually don't know what happens to these girls. So if we get any information, we will send it to you because we take your name and email so that if we do know, we can send you a prayer request on her behalf. But mostly you'll never hear from us again. You just take the girl and you pray for her. I want to tell you super, super fast a story just so you understand. One of the girls that we started out with, Scarlet Cord, the very first 100 girls that we signed up for somebody to pray for, one of them worked at one of the high-end brothels in Nevada, and she was very well known. She traveled all over the U.S. on talk shows, did interviews, saying, I think prostitution should be legalized. She was like a pro-sex worker person. She was very well known. We got her adopted out. She had no idea she was being prayed for. We got her adopted out, and within a month, she accepted Christ as her Savior and left the brothel, and now goes out and tries to bring in other people to go and help get these girls out of the brothels. I believe that it was because of her prayer sponsor that she is now out of the brothel. Next slide. So I'm going to end with this. I freed 1,000 slaves. I could have freed 1,000 more if only I had known they were slaves. So today, you now know that there are slaves. You may choose to look the other way, but you can never say again that you did not know. So my hope and prayer is that you will leave here with this information, you will educate other people, you will start something in your community, you will join something in your community. Sheboygan has a task force that started. If you need that information, I can give it to you. I think it's just called Sheboygan Anti-Human Trafficking Task Force. So I am thankful that you came tonight. I appreciate it, and I think I'm going to end on time, which never happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. You certainly gave us a lot to contemplate and pray about. And I don't think any of us will ever look at the Gospel of Luke, the Good Samaritan, in the same way again.